Hello. By the time you see this, I'll be on the road with my emotional support puppy. I'm going to grandma's funeral, and we will be in Connecticut where it's going to be wet and snowy. So it's good that I have you to be with. So what we will do here is, this is the second of the two lectures for next week on the history of media and into literacy. And the week after, we will get to the America and free speech and the First Amendment. And that's basically where we pause for a test. Anyway, that's what we will be doing this week. You go dry off. So I will have this week two one question little quizzes, one on each of the presentations. That way you will have the opportunity to be engaged, get a couple bit more points. I should have time to read your essays while I'm on the road and catch up a bit. So that's what's going on. Yes, on the road, I will be with the puppy, and that helps. Most affectionate creature in the world is a wet dog. I can tell you that is true. And this is from Play Wash Pint, the dog park. Anyway, where we are, we talked last time about the printing press and how important it is. It really is. Does not hurt. Okay.
The modern world is unimaginable without the prevalence of the printed word. Paper making and printing was developed during the Islamic Renaissance in the 8th century and spread to Europe during its Renaissance in the 14th. But the desire for new ideas and learning was limited by technological barriers. All printing was done manually, a laborious process producing only around 40 pages a day. German inventor Johannes Gutenberg made a breakthrough in 1450. After years of experimentation, he finally completed a printing press which revolutionized printing. The first book he published, in 1456, established the growing dominance of European society on the world stage.
Yes, you had the Arabic world and the Western world, but the spread of ideas through the printing press helped make Western culture dominant, and that's one reason we are speaking English.
A 4th century Latin edition of the Bible. Within 40 years, Gutenberg's presses were built in Italy, France, England, and elsewhere. Ironically, one early printed pamphlet was written in defense of scribes whose livelihoods were threatened by the new technology. The press also had social and political effects, bringing books out of the church and into the universities. In 1476, merchant William Caxton established a printing press in England. In 1516, the scholar Erasmus published a version of the Bible based on the original Greek. It contradicted the Latin text propagated by the Catholic Church for its own narrow interests, such as...
There you go. We started to have different interpretations of the Bible. You have different churches. This is why we have Catholics and Protestants, Methodists, Episcopalians, Baptists, because everybody has different ideas.
as receiving payment for delivering absolution. The English chaplain William Tyndale smuggled 18,000 New Testament Bibles into England in the early 1500s, where they were prohibited by the establishment. All people caught distributing the book were burnt at the stake and the Bibles were destroyed. Tyndale himself was executed for heresy in 1536. But the printing press didn't completely take off until the English Civil War in the mid-17th century. The Levellers used printed publications to advocate radical democratic reform, and the Royalists to defend the established order.
And this makes a big difference in the United States, that you have different people with different ideas arguing about how England should be governed, how we should worship. And England went through a huge civil war in which the king was beheaded. And it was all about religion, which is why the First Amendment in this country talks about not having a state religion, because they don't want any part of this.
It was a heady fusion of technology, increasingly educated mass audiences, and a breakdown in censorship laws which enabled unofficial publications. The press was burgeoning in Western Europe, but in Eastern Europe, Russia, the Middle East, Africa, and India, printing remained a small-scale specialist activity until the 1700s. Printing presses were built in the Islamic world in the late 1400s, but printing in Arabic and Turkish was prohibited. The Ottoman Empire was in a period of long-term decline, and its rulers feared the potentially radical impact that the printed word would have on society.
They wanted to control the press. They wanted to control ideas. And when you control ideas, you also control technology, the spread of ideas. And again, the Western world was about even with the Islamic world in the Middle Ages, but when the printing press came, everything changed.
But Turkish diplomat Ibrahim Mutafarika was convinced that the only way to halt the decline of Ottoman rule was the widespread dissemination of the scientific ideas which underpinned the advancement of the Western powers. He persuaded the Ottoman Sultan to establish a state-run press in 1729.
A little late.
In 1775, political agitator Thomas Paine sold 500,000 copies of his pamphlet Common Sense, which advocated American independence, in a single year, a total of 24 million printed pages.
By machine or by hand.
To produce this amount in the past would have taken 100 presses, 16 years. The first press in Africa was built in 1794, but was destroyed by French invaders. Throughout the colonial period, press freedoms were restricted and pro-European propaganda was spread to suppress national liberation movements. Printing output soared in the centuries that followed. The printing press became the primary communication technology of the modern era, variously used to inform or entertain, defend the interests of states and institutions, or to foment revolution. It remained unrivaled for 400 years until the advent of the internet.
Well, I think one could say broadcasting was as big a deal, but you get the point. So the printing press brought the Protestant Reformation, and it also brought exploration. It is no accident that Columbus sailed shortly after the creation of the printing press, because when Columbus found America, he printed his diaries. America stayed bound. Before then, the British had been here, the Vikings had been here, but their exploits were largely forgotten. With the printing press, everybody knew America was discovered. Okay, since we're speaking English, as it mentioned in the earlier video, Joseph Caxton started printing in England in 1476.
Mr. Cromwell, we have a duty to spread the good news.
Okay.
If the new monarchy is about
Henry VIII's father, Henry VII, on the printing
anything
press.
at all, then it is about liberty. Liberty from old superstitions, from fear and guilt. We are moving, my friends, from the darkness into the light.
I'm in agreement, I'm afraid. Fortunately, we have a new weapon
A new
to
weapon
promote our ideas.
to keep down the revolutionaries.
What in God's name is that?
It's called a printing press.
That's Henry VIII.
So it will change the world.
Mr. Cromwell, we
The point
have a duty to
is,
spread the good
it's
news.
like, aha,
If the
we
new
can
monarchy is about anything at
control
all, then it's about
everything
liberty.
if we can
Liberty from
control
old
the
superstitions,
printing
from
press.
fear and guilt.
Fear
We are
and
moving,
guilt.
my friends, from
All
the
of that.
darkness into the light.
I'm in agreement, I'm afraid. Fortunately, we have a new weapon to promote our ideas.
Anyway, so he has the printing press. And this video is about Caxton on how he started it. So, and what happened, he printed the Canterbury Tales, which gave us a common English language. Before then, different parts of England spoke French or Welsh or Celtic or German. You started having a common language. This is another thing the printing press gave us, a national identity. You had different villages in France all speaking French, different villages in Germany all speaking German. All of a sudden, you have a country, not just a village. So, La Mort d'Arthur, the death of Arthur, King Arthur. That national identity came from the printing press. I just mentioned that was Henry VIII in that one, but his father, Henry VII, set up a licensing scheme. If you did not like what we printed, they could send you to the Star Chamber and chop off your ears or nose. So immediately, soon as you start the printing press, they started to try to control the ideas that you get from the printing press. And you saw Henry VIII saying, ooh, we can do some stuff here. Other limits, prior restraint or censorship, saying that we would censor everything before you print it. Taxation, you have to put a stamp on every piece of paper to prove that you paid for your license. And if it's unlicensed printing, again, go to jail, chop off your nose or ears. I kid you not. They put you in jail for printing damaging falsehood or treason against the king. So immediately, these ideas that started revolutions and Reformation, the kings wanted to control. 15 and 1600s, you have Shakespeare. Julius Caesar again, remember Acta Diurna, the first newspaper? They had a few copies left over in the Library of Alexandria, which had fallen by this time, but those histories were floating around. And Caesar and Cleopatra come back. They become part of our culture, and they are remembered because we have the histories and the printing press, and Shakespeare. Then we start having newspapers.
Who's that? The free TurboTax live tax expert. Why do you need a tax expert? His advice.
Latest flip-flop card, morning paper.
His days. Is that up? But it was a big deal. Now we remember Julius Caesar. It can happen elsewhere, yes. Now, originally the newspapers were mostly advertising. They would talk about sales or plays, and they put the news around the ads to generate income. We'll get to that. You get the idea. It was a thing. Printing was limited by licensing at first. You had to have a license to print anything, and if the king didn't like it, you could lose your license. The US was different. Why? Now, if we had a live class, I'd ask. The US was different because we were far away from the king. 3 months, it took a month to 3 months to cross the Atlantic. So the king didn't know what was going on. You had an educated populace in the English colonies, whereas in Canada, New France, or in Mexico, New Spain, people came to convert the Indians, get gold, get furs, but they didn't come to stay. The English colonies came to stay, to settle. So there were a lot of people, and there were people who can read. First printing press was in Boston in 1638. The first newspaper, as they said, who talked about that first Thanksgiving, American mythology, 1690. 1718 in Hartford, Connecticut, James Franklin sets up a newspaper and hires his brother Ben. Things start getting busy then. The difference is America is far away from the king. You didn't have this problem with censorship as much. You had more ideas, and ideas are dangerous. We will get to that next week, and I will have 2 questions on these things, on these presentations shortly, and I will be in touch by email and anything else. Good luck on the week. I will be grading the essays while I'm on the road. Thank you.